If someone steals from you, what would you do? Call the police? Confront them? Cry? Eleanor Vance did something different. She smiled. She waited. And she planned. On the day of her wedding, when her fiancé thought he had won everything, she handed him a check that read, "In honor of Julian Ashford, the man who taught us all a valuable lesson." This is the most brilliant revenge story you've ever heard. Let's go. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I have a confession to make. I knew, from the very first moment Julian Ashford got down on one knee in that ridiculously overpriced restaurant overlooking the Manhattan skyline, that he was lying. I knew it the way you know the sky is blue or that your neighbor's dog will bark at exactly 6:47 a.m. every single morning. It was just a fact. A deeply inconvenient, heartbreaking, but undeniable fact. The ring he pulled out was beautiful, a 3-carat diamond that caught the candlelight and threw tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. It was the kind of ring women dream about. The kind of ring that makes strangers stop you on the street and ask if you just got engaged. The kind of ring that cost more than most people's cars. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that he'd bought it with my own inheritance. "Eleanor," he breathed, his blue eyes shimmering with what looked suspiciously like tears, "you are the most incredible woman I have ever met. From the moment I saw you in that little bookshop in Soho, I knew you were different. You were real. You were authentic. You were honest?" I offered sweetly. He paused. Just a fraction of a second. Long enough for someone paying attention to notice. "Perfect," he recovered smoothly. "You were perfect, Elle." Elle. He called me Elle. It was a nickname I'd never actually liked, but I'd never corrected him because I was too busy trying to figure out if he was genuinely stupid or just profoundly arrogant. As it turned out, he was both. The restaurant erupted in applause. The waitstaff brought out champagne. I smiled and posed for the obligatory selfies and let Julian kiss my cheek while a tiny part of my brain was already calculating exactly how much of my great-aunt Margaret's fortune he'd already managed to siphon off. The answer, as I would later discover, was, quite a lot. But here's the thing about me. The thing that Julian Ashford, and, frankly, most people, never fully understood. I am not a victim. I am a collector of information. A student of human nature. A woman who learned, at the tender age of 11, that the world is full of people who want to take things from you, and the only way to survive is to let them think they're winning. So when Julian proposed, I said yes. Not because I loved him, I'd stopped loving him around the time I found the receipt for the Rolex he'd bought for his business partner Margot. No, I said yes because I wanted to see just how far he was willing to go. I wanted to witness the masterpiece of his own destruction unfold in real time. I wanted to watch him dig his own grave, smile for the cameras, and then hand me the shovel when he was done. It took me exactly 3 months to complete my investigation. 3 months of pretending to be a lovesick fiancé. 3 months of letting Julian think he was the smartest man in any room. 3 months of watching him drain my accounts, forge my signature, and plan his glorious future with my money and Margot the business partner. I hired a forensic accountant named Martha Lynn, who looked like someone's grandmother but had the ruthless efficiency of a corporate raider. I hired a private investigator named Dante Reyes, who wore leather jackets and chain-smoked cigarettes even though he claimed to have quit 6 years ago. And I hired a lawyer named Priya Sharma, who had a tendency to laugh at the most inappropriate moments and a reputation for destroying wealthy men in court. Together, we built a case so airtight it would have made NASA jealous. And then, on a cold Tuesday morning in November, Julian Ashford made his final move. Julian was an expert at morning performances. He would wake up before me, always before me, and make coffee that he'd leave on my nightstand with a little note that said things like "For my queen" or "Every day with you is a gift." He'd sing in the shower. He'd whistle while making breakfast. He'd act like he was the happiest man on earth, and if I hadn't known better, I might have believed him. But I did know better. I knew, for example, that the coffee he made me every morning was just a prop. He didn't actually care if I drank it. He just needed me to see him making it. He needed the witnesses, the doorman, the neighbors, the delivery drivers, to see him being the perfect fiancé. Julian Ashford was, in many ways, a performance artist. "Morning, beautiful," he said that Tuesday morning, sliding my coffee onto the nightstand with his usual flourish. "I have some exciting news." I blinked sleepily, even though I'd been awake for over an hour, going over the files on my phone under the covers. "Oh?" "I've been thinking about the future. Our future. And I think we should get married sooner." I took a sip of the coffee. It was, as always, perfectly made. How ironic that the only thing he was actually good at was putting on a show. "Julian," I said, setting down the mug, "is everything okay?" His expression flickered. Just for a moment. A tiny crack in the performance. "Why wouldn't it be okay?" I shrugged. "You just seem anxious." That was the thing about Julian. He wasn't actually a good liar. He was just good at telling people what they wanted to hear. But once you started paying attention, the cracks became impossible to ignore. "I'm not anxious," he said, a little too quickly. "I'm excited. I've been working on something special for you. Something that will secure our future forever." "My future," I thought. "You mean my inheritance." "Oh?" I said, giving him my best adoring fiancé smile. "What kind of something special?" He sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hand in his. His hands were warm. Almost warm enough to make me forget that they were covered in my grandfather's blood. "Figuratively speaking. I'm going to be making a major investment," he said. "A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I need your help." "My help?" "The translation, of course, was your money." "Tell me about it," I said, leaning back against my pillows and feeling the weight of the hidden recording device in my nightstand. Julian launched into his pitch. It was, I had to admit, very well rehearsed. He'd clearly been practicing in front of a mirror. The right gestures. The right pauses. The right amount of enthusiasm. He was planning to buy into a development project in Dubai. A luxury resort that was going to revolutionize the hospitality industry. He needed access to my trust fund. Just temporarily. Just until the project started generating revenue. "Eleanor," he said, squeezing my hand with both of his, "this is our future. Our legacy. Our children's legacy." "Oh, now we're having children?" I nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds incredible, Julian." "Really? But you know I don't have access to the full trust until I'm 30. Julian's smile didn't waver. It was the smile of a man who knew he was about to win. "I know, sweetheart. But you can access half of it early for a life-changing investment, that's what the terms say. And I've been thinking, what could be more life-changing than securing our future together?" He'd memorized the terms of my trust fund. That should have been my first red flag. That should have been the moment I stood up, slapped him across the face, and called the police. But I didn't. Because I wasn't done yet. The transfer took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Julian being even more attentive than usual. 3 weeks of expensive dinners and surprise flowers and whispered promises in the dark. 3 weeks of watching him like a hawk while pretending to be completely, utterly convinced of his devotion. And then the money was gone. $5 million. Poof. Disappeared into the account of a shell company in the Cayman Islands that was, according to Martha Lynn's impeccable research, entirely owned by Julian Ashford and his business partner Margot Chin. I knew the moment it happened because my lawyer, Priya, called me at exactly 9:47 a.m. on a Friday morning. "Eleanor," she said, her voice brimming with barely contained glee, "he's done it. He's taken the bait. The whole thing. Hook, line, and sinker. Any chance we're being too obvious?" I asked, not actually worried. "Darling, he thinks he's a genius. Geniuses don't suspect that they're being played. That's why they're the easiest marks in the world." Priya was right, of course. Julian's fatal flaw wasn't greed, it was hubris. He believed he was smarter than everyone else. He believed that no one could possibly see through his carefully constructed facade. He believed that he was the protagonist of his own story, and everyone else was just a supporting character. It's amazing how often people confuse the role of protagonist with the role of not being a total psychopath. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I let Julian believe he had won. I let him book the venue for our wedding. I let him pick out flowers and menus and invitations and everything else that would have been a waste of time and money had I actually planned to go through with it. And then, the day before the wedding, I got an envelope. It was delivered to my apartment by a courier who refused to make eye contact and disappeared before I could even ask who had sent it. The envelope was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of expensive perfume. I opened it in my kitchen, wearing my favorite ratty bathrobe and drinking coffee out of a mug that said, "I'm not bossy, I'm the boss." Inside were photographs. Photographs of Julian and Margot. Julian and Margot at a hotel. Julian and Margot at the airport. Julian and Margot in Paris, in Rome, in what appeared to be a very expensive yacht in the Mediterranean. The dates on the photographs spanned the entire duration of our engagement. There was also a note, written in elegant cursive on cream-colored stationery, "Dear Eleanor, I thought you should know what you're getting into before it's too late. You seem like a lovely girl, and you deserve better than a man who's been spending your inheritance on another woman's diamond collection. Consider this a wedding gift, yours in solidarity, a friend." I read the note 3 times. And then I laughed so hard I almost choked on my coffee. A friend. A friend had sent me photographic evidence of my fiance's cheating. Of course, I already knew about the cheating. That was the whole point of hiring Dante, the private investigator with the smoking habit he couldn't quite quit. But what I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Julian's web of lies was even more extensive than I'd realized. The photographs showed him buying a house in the Hamptons. A house that, according to the deed attached to the envelope, was purchased with funds from my trust fund. A house that now belonged to Margot Chin. I should have been furious. I should have been devastated. I should have been weeping into my coffee mug and wondering where it all went wrong. But I wasn't. I was excited. Because this was the moment, the turning point, the climax, the beginning of the end. This was the moment when Eleanor Vance stopped being a victim and started being a force of nature. I called Priya. "We need to move up the timeline. Eleanor, you're supposed to be getting married in 24 hours. Exactly. And I want to look my absolute best when I ruin his life. I've always believed that weddings are inherently theatrical events. Their performances. A showcase of love and devotion and happily ever after that often bears very little resemblance to reality. People spend a small fortune on flowers and cake and dresses, all to prove to their friends and family that their relationship is the real deal. My wedding was going to be the most theatrical performance of them all. I spent the morning getting ready. Hair, makeup, the whole 9 yards. I wore a dress that cost more than most people's rent. I had a veil that trailed behind me like a cloud of pure defiance. I looked like a princess who was about to declare war. My maid of honor, my best friend since college, a fiercely loyal woman named Sloane, kept asking me if I was sure. Elle, she said, watching me put on my lipstick, I've never seen you this calm before a big moment. It's honestly starting to freak me out. Sloane, I said, patting her hand, do you trust me? With my life. But not with my money. I laughed. That's fair. But do you trust that I know what I'm doing? Elle, you always know what you're doing. That's the problem. You're terrifying when you know what you're doing. Good, I said, standing up and smoothing the front of my dress. Let's go get married. The ceremony was at St. Patrick's Cathedral. It was Julian's choice, he wanted it to be impressive. He wanted everyone to see that he'd landed a wealthy, beautiful woman and was about to secure her fortune for the rest of time. As I walked down the aisle, I had to hand it to him. The stage was impressive. Hundreds of guests. Flowers everywhere. A string quartet playing something romantic and forgettable. And Julian, at the altar, looking like the cat that got the cream. He was so sure of himself. So utterly convinced that he'd won. He didn't know that the woman walking toward him wasn't his bride, she was his reckoning. I reached the altar and smiled up at him. Hi. Hi, he breathed back. You look incredible. You too, I said. And I meant it. Julian Ashford was a piece of work, but he cleaned up nicely. The priest began the ceremony. Blah blah. Love and devotion. For richer or poorer. Speak now or forever hold your peace, the priest intoned, looking out over the congregation. And then the cathedral doors burst open. I will never forget the look on Julian's face. It was like watching a masterclass in emotional devastation. Shock. Confusion. Dawning horror. And then, as Margochin stormed down the aisle with a folder of papers in her hand, pure, unadulterated panic. Julian Ashford, Margot announced, her voice echoing through the cathedral, you are a liar and a fraud. The congregation gasped. The string quartet stopped playing. Julian looked like a fish that had been unexpectedly yanked from water. Margot, he said, his voice cracking, what are you doing? The same thing you've been doing for the past 3 years, she said, thrusting the folder at him. I'm putting on a performance. But I'm putting on the one where the supporting actress finally gets to steal the show. I watched this unfold with barely contained delight. Because here's the thing about Margot, I'd hired her. Margot was, in actual fact, a PI in her own right. She'd been working with Dante and Martha and Priya for the past 4 months, pretending to be Julian's mistress while simultaneously documenting every single one of his crimes. It was a role she'd excelled at. Mostly because it was exactly the kind of chaos she thrived on. You see, Margot continued, turning to the congregation with a theatrical flourish, Julian Ashford here has been embezzling from his fiance's trust fund for the past 8 months. He's been forging documents, lying to everyone who loves him, and planning to disappear the moment the wedding was complete. That's not true, Julian said, looking around wildly. Eleanor, don't listen to her. She's jealous. She's crazy, am I? Margot produced a stack of documents from her folder. I have bank statements. I have forged documents. I have photographs of you in the Cayman Islands with a rather suspicious-looking accountant. I have everything, Julian. Everything. The congregation was no longer in shock. They were now actively taking sides. I heard someone whisper I knew it in the back row. I heard my great-aunt Mildred mutter something about men being the worst. And Julian, the great Julian Ashford, the man who'd thought he could swindle his way to a fortune, was standing at the altar like a deer in the headlights, waiting for someone to save him. Is she telling the truth? Someone from his side asked. Julian opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. And that's when I made my move. I stepped forward. The congregation fell silent. Even Margot, who was not someone who usually observed theatrical silences, stopped talking and looked at me with something approaching respect. It's true, I said, my voice carrying through the cathedral like a blessing. Julian Ashford is a liar, a cheat, and a fraud. He proposed to me because he thought I was wealthy and naive. He spent the last 8 months draining my inheritance, planning his escape, and, as I'm sure you can all see, leading a double life with a woman who is not actually his mistress but rather a very talented actress named Margot. The congregation buzzed. Julian's mother, who had flown in from Connecticut for the occasion, looked like she was about to combust. Eleanor, Julian said, his voice suddenly becoming soft and pleading. The way it got when he was trying to manipulate me. Eleanor, please. This is insane. You're making a scene. You're ruining everything. I looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time in a very long time, I let myself see him for who he truly was. A pathetic, grasping, desperate man who had almost succeeded in destroying my life. Don't worry, Julian, I said, pulling a check out of my bouquet. I came prepared. I walked over to him and pressed the check into his hand. I'd had it printed that morning, specially designed for this moment. What is this? He said, staring at it. I leaned in and whispered, so only he could hear, it's from the charity I founded with the money you didn't manage to steal. I named it after you, actually. He looked at the check. His face went through an entire spectrum of emotions, confusion, realization, horror. Julian Ashford, the check read, this is to confirm that you are the first official donor to the foundation for people who are not good at stealing things. Your contribution of exactly $1 has been recorded in our annals. Additionally, your reputation is now attached to this charity. Every time someone donates, they're told they're following in the footsteps of a man who made a very poor decision. I smiled sweetly. I also set up a website. JulianAshfordIsAThief.com. Very tasteful. Very informative. His face went from white to red to a shade of purple that I'd only ever seen on cardiac arrest patients. He sputtered. You did this on purpose. This whole thing. The engagement, the wedding, everything. Of course I did, I said. Did you really think I didn't know? Julian, I've known you were lying since the night you proposed. I just wanted to see how long it would take you to hang yourself with your own rope. But you said yes, he said, almost whimpering. You said you loved me. I said yes because I wanted to watch you destroy yourself, I said, stepping back from him and raising my voice so the whole congregation could hear. I said yes because I knew that you were a liar and a fraud, and I wanted to document every single moment of it. I have bank statements. I have video recordings. I have enough evidence to put you in prison for a very, very long time." The cathedral was silent. And then, from the back row, I heard my great-aunt Mildred's voice, crystal clear in the quiet. "Well, I always knew that boy was trouble. He had shifty eyes." Did I mention the shifty eyes? I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. The aftermath of the wedding was, in a word, spectacular. Julian's mother was screaming something about defamation and the family name. His father was trying to make a quiet exit through the side door. His friends were looking at each other with expressions that suggested they were wondering if they'd ever trusted him at all. Margot was laughing. I mean genuinely laughing. She had her hand on the back of a pew and was actually wheezing. "Eleanor," she gasped, "did you see his face? Did you see his face? It was like a cartoon. I swear, I've never seen anyone look so much like they were about to cry and throw up at the same time." "I saw it," I said, grinning. It was a masterpiece of devastation. And then Julian collapsed to his knees in the middle of the aisle. "Please," he said, reaching out to me with both hands. "Please, Eleanor. Don't do this. I love you. I love you." I was stupid. I was greedy. "But I love you." "No, you don't," I said, stepping back from him. "You never did. You loved my money. You loved the idea of a wealthy, naive wife who would support your extravagant lifestyle. But you never loved me. And you know what, Julian? That's okay. Because I never loved you either." His face went white. "What?" "I never loved you," I repeated, louder this time. "I didn't love you the night you proposed, and I didn't love you on any of the nights we spent together. I was playing a game. And guess what, Julian? I won." He opened his mouth, closed it. Opened it again. And then he did the one thing that I hadn't expected. He started to laugh. It was a strange laugh, kind of broken and desperate. The laugh of a man who had just realized that everything he'd worked for, everything he'd connived and schemed for, had just crumbled to dust. "Good game," he said, climbing to his feet. "Good game, Eleanor. You're clever. You're really clever. But you know what? This isn't over. I'll get my revenge. You can't stop me." "You can't, it's over, Julian," I said. "It's been over for a long time. You just didn't know it." And then I walked away from him. I walked down the aisle of the cathedral, past the shocked faces of my guests, past the murmuring crowd of photographers that had gathered outside, and into the sunlight. It was a beautiful day. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The story of Julian Ashford, the heartless fraud who had tried to swindle his way to a fortune and was publicly humiliated at his own wedding, went viral within hours. The website I'd set up, julianashfordisathief.com, got over 1 million views in the first 48 hours. The charity I'd founded in his honor received donations from all over the world, each one accompanied by a note that said something like "in honor of Julian, who taught us all a very valuable lesson about not being terrible." Julian's reputation was destroyed. His business partners abandoned him. His family stopped speaking to him. He lost everything: the money, the house, the job, the respect of anyone who'd ever known him. And Margot? She'd gotten her share of the money from the evidence she'd provided. She'd also landed a book deal, a speaking tour, and a generally wonderful reputation as a woman who'd brought down a bad man. As for me, I'd emerged from the whole affair with a new appreciation for revenge. Not the petty, small-minded kind of revenge that leaves you feeling empty. The good kind. The kind that helps you move on with your life and helps you become a better, stronger, more complete person. I also emerged with a personal fortune that was almost back to where it had been before Julian started stealing from it. Mostly because Priya was an excellent lawyer and had gotten a court order freezing all of Julian's assets and returning my money to me. For the record. In the end, I married someone else. Not the rich guy I'd originally been engaged to. Not the billionaire who'd saved me from the paternity test drama. Not any of the people who'd been in my life before I met Julian. No, I married a man named Owen. Owen was a very talented graphic designer, a man with a dimpled smile and a laugh that made everything in the world feel better. He was not wealthy. He was not particularly ambitious. He was exactly the kind of man that Julian would have mocked and sneered at. He was also the best thing that had ever happened to me. We got married in a small ceremony at a friend's house. No thousands of guests, no press coverage. Just our friends, our family, and a general sense of joy. It was, without a doubt, the best day of my life. And I owed a lot of it to Julian. Because if Julian hadn't been a terrible, greedy, manipulative liar, I wouldn't have learned to stand up for myself. I wouldn't have learned to recognize the difference between real love and a calculated performance. I wouldn't have been strong enough, brave enough, or smart enough to walk away from the people who didn't deserve me and toward the people who did. So, in a weird way, Julian was the best thing that ever happened to me. He taught me everything I needed to know about what I didn't want in a partner. He taught me that I was stronger than I thought. He taught me that I could survive anything. He also taught me that donating money to charity in someone's name is an incredibly effective way to get revenge. But I guess you already knew that. You might be wondering what the moral of this story is. And there are many possible answers. You could say that the moral is, don't steal from your fiance's inheritance. That's certainly a good one. You could say that the moral is, be careful who you trust, especially when they look too good to be true. You could say that the moral is, revenge is a dish best served cold, and also with a very smug smile. But, as is the way with these things, the real moral is a little more personal than that. For me, the moral of this story is, you can't find the love you deserve until you let go of the love you don't. And sometimes, letting go means pushing someone off a cliff and watching them fall. Not literally, of course. That would be a crime. But metaphorically. Definitely metaphorically. So, in summary, Julian got what he deserved. I got what I needed. And everyone involved got a really good story to tell at parties. I call that a happy ending. A year after the wedding that wasn't, I ran into Julian by accident. He was working at a coffee shop in Brooklyn, wearing a stained apron and looking thoroughly dejected. I was on my way to meet Owen for lunch, and I almost walked right by him. But then he saw me. "Eleanor," he said, his voice cracking. "Julian," I said, not breaking my stride. "Wait, please, I need to talk to you." I looked at him. He looked tired. Defeated. He wasn't wearing the expensive clothes anymore, or the expensive watch, or the expensive smile. He was just a man who'd made a really, really bad decision. "My shift is over in 5 minutes, he said. "Can we just, please?" "Let me explain." I checked my watch. I had time. And I was curious. 5 minutes, I said. "Then I'm going to lunch." He sat me down at a table in the back of the coffee shop. He was nervous in a way that I'd never seen him before. Nervous and very, very apologetic. I made a mistake, he said. A huge, horrible mistake. I was terrible to you. I was greedy and cruel and I don't deserve your forgiveness. Good start, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Keep going. It's been a rough year, he continued. I lost everything. My friends, my family, my job, all gone. I'm working here part-time, living in my friend's basement, and I can barely afford food. I nodded sympathetically. That sounds terrible. It is terrible. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. But Julian, I said, leaning forward, do you want to know what the worst thing that ever happened to me was? He went pale. The worst thing that ever happened to me, I said, was when I realized that the man I loved was really just a grifter who'd been using me from the very beginning. That's what the worst thing was. And do you want to know what I learned? I learned that you can't love people who don't love you. I learned that you can't force a relationship to work if it was built on lies. And I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. He opened his mouth. Closed it. But I also learned, I said, standing up, that revenge is a beautiful thing. I learned that watching someone get exactly what they deserve is the most satisfying experience in the world. And Julian, I reached into my purse, pulled out a business card, and placed it on the table. You've been the best learning experience I ever had. He looked at the card. I've set up a foundation, I said. It's called the Eleanor Vance Foundation for Empowering Women Who Have Been Wronged. And I'd like you to donate to it. In any amount you can spare. That would be the most poetic thing you could possibly do. He opened his mouth. Closed it. And for a moment, he looked at me with something like respect. You're really good at this, he said. I know, I said, smiling. I learned from the best. I walked away from the coffee shop, feeling lighter than I'd felt in years. The sun was shining. The birds were singing. And I had a beautiful, wonderful, perfect lunch to go to. There was no good reason to hold on to the past. The past was where mistakes belonged. The present was where I needed to be, and the future was where I was going. And, if I was being very honest with myself, a part of me was still laughing at the look on Julian's face when he realized that he'd lost everything. It was the look of a man who had finally understood that sometimes, the best revenge is just living well. But also, maybe, occasionally, suing someone for fraud. At the end of the day, we all have our own battles to fight. Our own demons to slay. Our own checks to rip up in front of our ex-fiancés. But the one thing I truly believe, the lesson that I've carried with me from the day I walked away from that cathedral, is that love should never feel like a transaction. And that forgiveness is overrated. Actually, to be honest, I'm not sure I believe in forgiveness at all. I believe in moving on. I believe in focusing on the people who love you and deserve your time. But forgiveness? That's just an invitation for people to keep hurting you. Julian hurt me. He used me. He tried to destroy my life. I took my revenge. But I didn't need to forgive him to move on. I just needed to accept that he was who he was, and that I was better off without him. And that's the part one wants you to understand, if nothing else. The best revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about proving to yourself that you're stronger than the people who hurt you. That you can rise above the lies and the betrayal and the stolen inheritance. And if you happen to get a really good story out of it as well, then, that's just the cherry on top. So, the next time you're faced with a terrible, awful, no good, very bad ex, just remember, revenge is a dish best served cold, but it's even better served with a smile, a good lawyer, and a charity named after the person who tried to ruin your life. Trust me. I speak from experience. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the sunlight. Somewhere down the street, a car horn honked, and a bird chirped in a nearby tree. It was an ordinary day in Brooklyn. A day like any other. But it wasn't ordinary. It was the first day of the rest of my life. No more hiding. No more pretending. No more performing love to people who didn't deserve it. I was Eleanor Vance, and I had won. I picked up my phone and texted Owen, on my way. I'll have the pasta. He wrote back, pasta sounds perfect. See you soon. And I smiled. I smiled because I knew that everything was going to be all right. I smiled because I'd finally let go of the past. And I smiled because, somewhere in the city, Julian Ashford was still figuring out how to pay his rent with dignity. But that wasn't my problem. It never had been. Thank you for reading. If you enjoyed this story, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs a little hope, and a little revenge, in their life. If you want more stories like this, or if you'd like to read more about my adventures in revenge, be sure to check out the rest of the series. Julian might be gone, but there are plenty of other terrible people in the world who need to be taught a lesson. Until next time, she walked down the aisle as a bride. She walked out as a warrior. And somewhere in Brooklyn, a man named Julian Ashford is still trying to figure out how it all went so wrong. If this story made you smile, hit like. If it made you think, hit subscribe. Until next time. Remember, karma is patient. And she's always watching.